Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to look at a white gas fuel stove versus a traditional propane stove. These are MSR products, but this would apply to any other manufacturer as well. The question is, who should be using a liquid fuel stove and who should be using a gas stove? Should you buy one of these? Should you use one of these? Well, let's break it down a little here. This uses propane, or isopropane in this case, and here's your little stove head. And this is your traditional camping kit. It's primarily made to boil water, but you can cook on it as well. Whereas this one here doesn't use propane, it uses white naphtha fuel, or Coleman fuel, or white gas as it's called. So what's the difference? Which one should I be getting? Well, if you look on YouTube, you'll find a lot of people posting videos showing unboxing and how to set this up and use it, but that's all they tell you. There's really no information there to make a decision. It comes down to temperature and altitude. Once you get down to freezing point at 0, these stop working. These will work in any temperature and at almost at any altitude. The altitude problem in the end comes down to the lack of oxygen, where neither will work properly. However, this one will work in cold conditions below 0. This one starts to struggle at about 10 degrees. At 5 degrees it's noticeably slower, less efficient. At 0 it may not work, or it may work depending on how you use it. And once you get to -5, these are useless. Now, some people may say, oh, I can use mine down to -10 or so forth, but you've got to jump through a lot of hoops to make these work properly. You've got to keep them in your sleeping bag, you've got to warm them with your hands, you've got to baby them. You really don't have time to muck around with that. So the answer to the question is, which one should I use? Well, generally, warm weather, cold weather. I'm going to ignore altitude at the moment because I don't climb mountains. Most people, they're fair weather hikers. They hike and camp from mid-spring through to late autumn, and these are more than adequate. The advantage of these isn't just their small size. As you can see, they're about 1/3 of the size of the white gas stove. They're also 1/3 of the weight, and there's no maintenance to them. When you run out of gas, you just buy a new bottle. They're very light and compact. This is a Whisperlite head. You can get these knockoff products for about $30 on Amazon. So this is actually a cheap, light, compact, and easy way to boil water when it's warm, when it's 0 degrees or above. As I said, if you're camping sometimes down to -5, you probably get away with just sticking with that with a bit of hassle. So this one is when the weather really gets cold. And when I say cold, if you're camping or hiking in -20, -30, -40, this will work beautifully. It's bulkier, it's heavier. So as far as the question goes, which one should I get? If you're like me, camping all year round, sometimes it's 35 degrees, sometimes it's -35 degrees. I have both. So let's have a look at how to set this up. But not just that, let's look at a few things that you can do to make it work properly, because most of the videos skip that information, or they don't know that information, primarily because they're done by men, and men don't read instruction manuals, myself included. So what do you need? Well, you need the kit, which is the stove head kit. You do not get the bottle with the kit. You get the head. Let's have a look in here. You get a wind guard. You don't get a kit, a repair kit. This you need to buy as an extra. you get a pump and you get a basic lubricant and a little spanner to do basic repairs. So as I said, you do need to get a repair kit because these are, unlike the gas canisters, high maintenance units. Every time you use it, you need to do some sort of maintenance. Don't be put off by that. We'll have a look at that in a second. So how do you do it all? First of all, you take your bottle, you push and twist to take off the lid. I've got a little bit of liquid fuel in here. You would normally fill it up to the shoulder of the bottle. Now, why not fill it all the way? Well, you're going to put in this pump. And this pump takes up space. So if you fill it right up and you put the pump in, it's going to spill over. You're going to get it on your hands, on your gloves, on your sleeping bag, on your tent. It's going to make a real mess. So don't fill it up beyond the shoulder. You place this in and screw it up tight. What we have here, this is the outlet for the pump, which pumps air into the bottle to create positive pressure. And this plastic tube has a little filter on it. That's how the liquid gets from the bottle into the body of the pump and out to your stove. Now, the trick to put this in is that there's not a lot of room here. So if you put your finger on that little tube and bend it around a little, then it will go in. Okay, so let me just tighten that up. Okay, there we go. Thing to note here is you have a tap, you have an outlet, and you have the pump. Now, people will say you just need to pump this about 20 times to get pressure up. That's a load of bull dust. You probably need to do it 40 or 50 times. The fuller the bottle, the less you need to do it. If you've got a half full bottle, you're going to have to pump away at this thing for ages to get some decent pressure. So I'm just going to do this a few times just to get a small amount of pressure in here. This bottle isn't full. So as I said, when it's half full, you've got to pump it a lot more. So I'll probably even go further than that. Now what we have now here is we have liquid in the bottle, we have an airspace, and it's sealed off by this little tap. So you can attach the stove head or take the stove head off without it causing any problems or changes in pressure inside. So let's just do that. We lay it down, and you lay it down so that the tap is towards the top. It's facing up. Then you take your stove head, spread it out, and in here there's an O-ring. And if you just start shoving this into that outlet willy-nilly, there's a good chance you're going to wreck the O-ring. So they supply some liquid grease. You get extra grease when you buy the kit, but I find that in the real world, it's cold, it's blowing, you just want to get this up and running to get some heat and warmth. You just lick your fingers and moisten that tip. Okay, and that should be enough to get it together. Whoops. So let me just plug that in. Oh, and before you do that, notice here, this is a little clip that stops the hose from accidentally popping out, causing a spill of fuel. Now, before you attempt to connect this up, you'll see that you can twist that around. You'll see that it's not sent, the pipe doesn't come through in the center, it's offset, and that's so that it can only go in one way. There's a little fitting here to ensure that this will only fit in one way, and the way to fit it in is with this little part of the clip facing up, with the clip towards you, not on the other side. So let's just gently, slowly, there we go, it's all the way in. So you push the plunger down to get the clip past, and then it locks in from behind. So that's just to stop you from accidentally pulling that out. And if the tap is on and you pull that out, of course you're going to get a big spill. Going to cause all sorts of problems. So that's it. That's all ready to go now. You spread out the legs and the pot stand, and you're now ready to get this up and running. Now what you do is that you need to, once you've pumped up some pressure, you need to open the tap a little ways, and it will fill up this cup in the bottom here. See the cup? And there's a wick. What you want to do is slowly, maybe just a half turn or so, open the tap, and eventually after a few seconds, maybe 10 seconds or so, you'll see the fuel start trickling out and filling up this cup. And when it's about half full, you turn the tap off because there's still pressure pushing liquid in. You don't want the cup to overflow, because again that's going to wreck your tent or your sleeping bag or get all over you. So I'm just going to do that. You probably won't be able to see it too well, but I'll just turn that on a little. And it's difficult to see. You're best to have it backlit, so maybe with a headlamp, so you can see when the fuel is coming through. I can hear it. Here it comes. Now I can see it. Now I'll turn it off because it's about halfway. Okay, so now we're ready to go. Now this doesn't mean that we're ready to cook. It just means that we're ready to heat up this appliance. And the reason I say heat up is that this holds a stable liquid, which is your white gas, whereas a propane tank has liquid fuel, but there's an airspace at the top, and the liquid fuel is unstable, so it boils off or forms a gas in the top of the canister, which is why when you're in freezing or below, these no longer work, because there's no reason for the fuel to boil off. It's not warm enough. So what we need to do, in a similar way, we need to convert the liquid into a gas so we can then burn it. And that's what this metal loop is for. The metal loop will boil the liquid fuel and turn it into a gas, which the stove can then use. However, at the moment, nothing's going to happen because that coil, that metal loop, is not warm enough. So what we do, getting rid of the extra fuel, is that we warm up that loop by lighting the small amount of fuel that's in the cup. And don't be alarmed, this is normal. This is what happens. So it starts off fairly low, and if you listen quietly, carefully, you'll, after a half minute or so, you'll start to hear a little hissing noise, which is this loop heating up and boiling the liquid into a gas. And the first time you do this, it's quite alarming because the flame can get quite large, about the size of a volleyball. But it's doing its job, which is heating up the loop. A little bit smoky. You probably don't want to do this inside your tent. I'll just move that light out of the way so it doesn't get all smoked up. And I'm giving you this and showing you this in real time so you get a good idea of what happens. This is normal. Also in the kit you get is a circular piece of aluminium which you place underneath the stove head to stop it melting stuff underneath it. So as it dies down, you can see that the yellow flame is almost gone. Now I'm going to turn on. Okay. So what's happening is I've pumped air into the bottle. That's now pushing the fuel through that white tube we saw into this hose. It's vaporized into gas, and then the stove head is burning it. It's not burning really hard and loud and hot because I haven't pumped enough air in. If your stove isn't working quite too well, it's usually because you need to pump more air into the bottle. And as time goes on, every 5, 10, 15 minutes or so, you need to pump more pressure into the bottle as the fuel level goes down. So now I'm just going to turn it off. And that's about as far as your usual unboxing video goes, as far as showing you how it works. Now I'm just going to let that cool down for a bit. As you can see, it takes a little while to sort of turn off, unlike the isopropane bottle and head. They turn off immediately. These have got to burn the residual gas. Okay, so once it's out and you let it cool for a little while, you then disconnect it, and the trick here is that this hose is still full of liquid. So don't just rip it out and wave it about, because you're going to get fuel all over the place. Again, you're going to get on your tent, on your sleeping bag, on your hands, on your pants, your shoes. And while it's certainly not as stinky as diesel, it will break down plastics and nylon and so forth. So you don't want your expensive tent getting a whacking great hole in it. Not to mention making it flammable, more flammable than usual. So that's it. It's off. It's still quite hot, so I'm not going to touch that. But it's still going. Yeah, still flicking away. I'll just wait a moment. So again, this is all in real time, so you get a good idea of what to expect. Still going. Still going. That's quite normal. As it's burning off the last bit of gas, but not the liquid that's in this hose. The gas that's in this loop here. Now you notice that this is kind of, once you get a pot of water on top of this, it's quite stable. But in the meantime, notice how it's awkward. It flops around. This is where I suggest you have this very high-tech piece of equipment called a stove board. This is just a piece of particle board. This is the round circular piece of aluminium sheeting that comes with the stove. I placed it on the board so it acts as a bit of a heat shield. And what I do is that just stops the bottle from moving around, and I sort of push it up so that there's a bit of positive pressure coming this way. And I've got these screws jutting up here, and they will fit the legs of the stove. Okay. So the stove, if I push this up a little bit, that'll put more pressure on the hose, and that'll tend to twist the stove into position, and it will lock in quite well. So that just stops everything from flopping around. It means also if you take the pot off, the stove head isn't going to flop over. You can place this on snow or on a backpack or a box or whatever, and this system worked quite well, and it cost pretty much nothing, just a few screws. That's it. Okay, so here's the trick. Once you've finished, you unclip the safety lock there. You gently wiggle this out from the O-ring, and this will, as mentioned, still quite hot, it will still have fuel in it. So you need to carefully keep the hose up and then go off and empty it out somewhere. I'm just going to empty it here and clean it up later. Okay, so you don't want to sort of pack your stove head up and stick it back in its bag, because it's going to be A, hot, and B, fuel will be dripping everywhere. So that's pretty much empty now. I can close all this up, and I'm just going to pack this away again. Flick this over to the other side. come around here and lock that in. Now, this is where the maintenance comes in, and this is something that men who buy these products, they only read the instructions far enough to get it working, myself included. Women tend to read all of the instructions, so they probably already know this. But once you've finished with using your product, using one of these white gas stove heads, it has a needle inside the jet, which is inside here. And that needle is designed to be shaken and clear away the carbon that builds it up in the jet. If you don't do this, after you use the stove a few times, no matter what you do, you really can't get a hot flame. You really can't. It takes much longer to boil water, and eventually it'll just stop working because it's clogged up. So once you've finished, every time you finish and turn it off, you need to clear the jet. And you do that just by shaking it upside down and the other way. How many times should you do this? Not 5, 10 or 20 times, 50 times, up to 100 times, just to make sure that that jet is clear. It doesn't take a long time, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, but that will clear the carbon out of the jet. And so it's ready to go for next time you want to use your stove. So in summation, make sure that you clear the jet out every time you use this stove head by shaking it. You'll hear the rattle of the needle inside the jet cleaning it out. And don't just do it for 5 or 10 times, do it 50 or more times to make sure that you keep that jet clean. That will ensure that you don't have any problems, or at least the problems will be minimized. And you'll always be able to get the stove up and running no matter how windy and cold and frigid it may be. I've had this stove for about 3 years now. It's the only problem it's ever given me is when I haven't cleaned the jet out properly. And eventually the jet will deteriorate. So replacing the jet with a new one, using the repair kit, is a very simple job. It just takes a few minutes. The other thing you need to do, probably more often than replace the jet, is cleaning out this hose, because white fuel isn't that clean. And you think that it's going to be pristine, but it's not. So maybe once a year after a camping season in the cold, you need to clean out that hose. And there are videos online on the MSR site actually that will show you how to do that, how to pull out the cable that's inside the hose, how to clean it out, and so forth. There are other videos showing you how to dismantle the head to replace the jet, and also how to do a full maintenance cleanup of your pump. So when you're not using this, when you're storing it, or when you're traveling for the day, I highly suggest that you take the pump out, release the pressure gradually by undoing the collar there. Do it with the tank upright. Release the pressure slowly. Take it out. Put the cap back on, and then there's less chance of you breaking the pump while you're in transit. Now, besides keeping the jet clean, I find that you don't need to buy brand new fuel every year. It doesn't seem to deteriorate like, for example, car fuel may deteriorate over the winter. It seems to work just fine. You can buy the fuel in all sorts of places. I just get mine from Walmart. It's cheapest there. You don't need to be using special highly filtered fuel that MSR sells at a premium. If you look after the device, if you keep the jet clean, it's going to last you a long time. As I said, I've been using this for a few years now. This isn't just an unboxing video by someone who doesn't really know how they work. Make yourself a stove board. It'll make your life easier. You can make it quite small, actually, if you're backpacking. And you can even get away without it if need be. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. Give me a thumbs up if you like it, and in the comments let me know if I've missed anything. Thank you. Getting back to this stove head in particular, this is the International, Whisperlite International stove head. And what that means is that unlike some of the other stove heads that MSR sell, this one is designed to take different size jets so that you can use different types of fuel. It comes set up to use naphtha or white fuel. It can also be adapted by changing the jets to a different size to use kerosene or car fuel, car petrol or gasoline. Now, what's the advantage of that? Well, if I'm flying up to the Arctic to go out and photograph white walls, I can't take fuel on board the aeroplane with me. So when I get up there to Resolute or wherever, Pond Inlet, I can only use the fuel that's available to me up there, and that will generally be kerosene or gasoline. So you can change the jets in these to put different types of fuel into the bottle, and they run perfectly well using those different fuels, as opposed to some of the other heads which won't do that. Now, there are other designs to be specialised to be used in windy areas and so forth. Have a look at the MSR website and just pick out a stove that you prefer. But for myself, this is the one that I liked because it's adaptable. It's a bit smaller and lighter than some of the others, and I have the opportunity to use other types of fuel if need be. Now, in order to do that, I suggest strongly that you get the repair kit for this particular stove head. That way you not only get spare lubricant and tools, you also get the jets that you need to run other fuel. Okay, I've reassembled it just to show you a few other bits and pieces that will come in handy. First off, when you prime the pump, you hear that ping? That's the sound of the air coming out of the pump into the bottle. Now, when you first buy these work perfectly, but after a while, what you're going to find, particularly in cold weather, is that you're going to pump this away, but there's no ping sound. It's kind of gummed up inside. So what you need to do is, well, you've got to persevere for a start and just keep pumping, and eventually it'll come right. And when it gets really, really bad, you need to do some maintenance on the pump. And there are videos all over the place showing you how to do that. The other thing is that when it's really cold, this will tend to take a lot longer, or it'll become more of a problem, not getting it to prime properly, not getting it to pump through that ping of air. So what you've got to do is you've got to warm it up. And so what I would normally do is I take the pump out and I would just hold it in my hands or put it in a plastic bag and then into my jacket to warm it up. If it's not that cold, even if just placing your hand around the pump for a minute or so will help free it up and get it to work properly. But if it gets really bad, you just need to do some maintenance, pull it apart and do the maintenance on it. Now, the other thing that we didn't show or discuss was the heat guard. It comes rolled up, you unroll it, and you clip it together with little fold over pieces, and you notice that there's a little cutout. There's a cutout there. That goes over the hose. Now, on the point of warming this up, generally in really cold weather, what I'll do is when I've finished using it, when I clean the jet out and so forth, I also make sure that I pump some air into the bottle to make sure there's a decent amount of pressure. So next time I go to start the stove, there's already pressure in the bottle ready to push the fuel out. It doesn't matter if this pump doesn't work properly initially. Then once I get everything going, if you turn this around so that that gap is there, that's going to allow some heat from the stove to come through onto that pump and help free it up, help keep it working properly. And you'll generally find that once the stove has been going for a couple of minutes, it'll work quite well without any problems. Now, the reason why we use the wind guard is that, as we mentioned earlier, the whole point of preheating this is to heat up that coil. And there's a 50-50 chance that if the wind's blowing, it's going to be blowing that flame away from the coil, so it's not going to heat up very well. So if you use your wind guard like that, then it's going to help to warm up your pump, but it's also going to protect the flame so it actually heats up the coil efficiently. And then when you finish, you just pull that apart and roll it up and stow it away. I even use this with my propane setup in the summertime. Now, just a few final points. When you buy your repair kit, make sure you get the right one. The repair kits come in different varieties for different types of stove heads, so make sure you get the right kit for your stove. As far as fuel goes, in extreme cold, you're going to be melting a lot of snow to make water. You need a couple of litres of water a day just to stay hydrated and healthy and warm. So I allow about 1 litre per day of fuel in the extreme cold. That will allow you to cook your food or heat up water for your food. It'll allow you enough fuel to melt enough snow to make your water for the day. And it also allows a little bit if you're using a heater on your stove head, which I do sometimes. And so 1 litre per day is a generous amount. And then throw on top of that 1 or 2 litres spare if you're going way off grid. I usually buy my fuel not in those 1 litre bottles, but in 4 litre cans, and just decant it as I need it. If you have used your stove and you've turned it off and it's been sitting there just for a minute or so, you can just relight it. You don't need to go through the reheating phase. However, after 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, particularly on really cold weather, you'll find that if you do need to relight the stove, you have to go through the preheat system again. If you're off-grid or on an expedition, I sincerely suggest that you get a backup pump. In fact, if you get a whole backup kit, the entire head, the whole stove head, plus the appropriate repair kit, it won't lead you astray. It sounds like you're blowing money, but it's better to have a stove that's working out in the middle of Antarctica than it is to wish that you'd brought an extra stove head with you. And trying to repair a stove head with gloves and mitts and so forth is just horrible. So if you're going to be away off-grid, for an extended period of time, buy an entire new kit to take with you, including the pump. You can also buy an Arctic pump, a pump that's designed for sub-zero temperatures and only recommended for use below freezing point, that will overcome some of the issues I've spoken about with sticking or jamming or not working pumps in the cold. Generally, I think that despite the fact that you need extra maintenance for these heads, for these stove heads, it's the way to go. There's no alternative. Just get it, use it, and if you're also camping and hiking and so forth through warm months, just get the isopropane kit as well. It'll serve you well. If you've got any questions or require more detail about a part of this video, just leave a comment down below. Thank you.